Boethius was a philosopher and statesman who lived in the Roman Empire in the 6th century CE. He led a life of great success and prosperity until he was suddenly arrested on false charges of treason. Despite his protests of innocence, he was thrown into a dark and miserable prison cell, stripped of his wealth and power, away from his family and loved ones. His fortune was turned upside down. In one day, he turned from one of the wealthiest, most powerful, and most influential men into one of the most miserable.
Well, he was put in one of the small cells like this, and I'm pretty small guy and it is really tiny for me as well. Just staying in a place like this is just unimaginable. And then he was slowly falling into despair, and at some point he was visited by unexpected guest.
His visitor was a woman he used to know and admire, but as time went on, his wealth and fame grew and his admiration of her faded. And this mysterious figure who decided to pay a visit to Boethius at the lowest moment of his life, weeks before his execution, was no one else but the Lady Philosophy herself. He used to admire her. He used to follow every piece of advice and wisdom she gave him back in time. But as Boethius's wealth and power grew, and as fortune favored him, his vision got clouded and his connection with the Lady Philosophy and her wisdom faded with time. She finds him at a desperate state. She finds him surrounded by the muses of poetry, and they seduce Boethius to sing songs of the glorious past, of the times when he had no problems, when fortune favored him. And she gets really angry with them. She tells him that they do not help their patient, that they habituate the mind of their patient to the pains and sufferings by distracting them instead of focusing their effort to fix the problems and sufferings they are experiencing. This is really interesting because we can compare this to our own modern time, and we can see that our human nature hasn't changed over those 1,400 years since Boethius. Because back in his time, people used to distract themselves and focus their attention on things such as poetry and songs. But of course, today we do the same using social media, films, and other forms of entertainment. This is the first thing that the Lady Philosophy does. She says that we shouldn't comfort ourselves by entertainment, by focusing our attention to things that don't matter. And she calls those muses hysterical sluts. This is exactly what Boethius writes. He says that the Lady Philosophy told that hysterical sluts that distract people and cloud their mind and reason with emotion should leave this cell. And the muses of poetry run in fear away from the Lady Philosophy. And Boethius stands in front of the goddess, in front of a friend who he used to have, and he's dazzled by her wisdom. He notices that on her dress there are 2 words inscribed. On the left side of her dress there is an inscription that says natural philosophy, which we today call science. But on the other side of her dress there is another inscription that says moral philosophy. This is very important because for ancient Greeks and Romans, in order to live a happy life, you had to live a life in accordance with nature, in accordance with harmony of nature. And the only way you could do this, the only way you could act in harmony, is by studying it using your reason, your rationality, by learning how the world works, so you could be part of this harmony. After the muses of poetry flee in fear away from this cell, Boethius and philosophy stay alone. And what you might expect is that Lady Philosophy might have attacked or blamed Boethius for his current state. She doesn't do anything like that. She doesn't attack, she doesn't criticize, she doesn't even blame him for forgetting about her. Instead, she asks him to tell the story of how he appeared where he is. This is another advice that Boethius and tells us through the words of the Lady Philosophy. He tells us that we need to articulate our fears, our current state, in order to be able to solve our problems. It is worth remembering that what we are discussing here is essentially Boethius's journal that he wrote several weeks before he was executed. It is also one of the first pieces of prison literature ever written in history. Boethius wrote this weeks before he was about to be executed, so every tip that he gives us comes very deep from his mind, and he tells us that we need to articulate our fears in order to be able to deal with them. He tells his story to the Lady Philosophy. He says that he was trying to put in prison a group of corrupt politicians, but they found out about his intentions and they decided to act first, and they accused Boethius of treason. And the king, Theodoric the Great, the man who put Boethius into the cell that he was in, was a paranoid ruler, as many rulers are, and he didn't investigate whether the accusation was true or not. He essentially is writing a journal. If we just remember that all of this was described to us by Boethius, we can understand that this was his prison journals, essentially. The Lady Philosophy hears the story of Boethius without uttering a single word. She doesn't interrupt him even when he gets overly emotional and sometimes nonsensical. She tells him that the reason why he is so lost, so miserable, is because he has lost the seat of his mind. He has lost his capacity for reason. It is because his mind is clouded by emotions, by anger. He has lost and crumbled the inner citadel. Inner citadel was a word that you can encounter a lot in Stoics. It is a place which philosophers try to cultivate in themselves so they can retreat and find peace in times of tumult, in times of chaos. She tells him that Boethius has lost all of this. And the reason for this is that for many years he put all the happiness that he experienced in the hands of the goddess of fortune. And it is important to remember that for ancient Greeks and Romans, there was no goddess that they feared more than the goddess of fortune, who they called Fortuna. She could make you the wealthiest, the most famous, the most powerful person in the world, just if she wanted to, if she favored you. She could give it to you at any moment. But the trick was that she was one of the most capricious of goddesses who ever existed. She could take away everything from you, every external thing she had given you, in a single moment if she changed her mind. If you relied on her for happiness, you should also expect that that happiness can disappear at any second. For centuries, some of the greatest thinkers in history discussed Boethius's concept of fortune and how she works and how she influences our life. And one of the interesting things that he describes here, he tells us that fortune by her very nature is constantly changing. She's very mutable. One day she favors you, the other day she might turn against you. But this is what makes her beautiful in some sense. She's constantly changing, so the unfortunate should always expect that at any moment she might favor them and the other way around. Boethius tells us that maybe sometimes unfortunate people are in fact lucky, because during the times of misfortune we cannot rely on her, and we have to rely on ourselves to cultivate and find happiness from within instead of finding happiness in wealth, power, or fame. And throughout this conversation between Boethius and the Lady Philosophy, we explore how we can build this happiness from within. One of the ways to do this is to focus on our reason, not to be clouded by our emotions, by constructing our inner citadel that always guarantees our happiness. If we rely on fortune for our happiness, we should also be kind of in agreement that at any moment she can disappear, so we shouldn't complain when she turns away from us. When we rely on happiness from within, whatever happens around us will never affect us. We'll always stay grounded. We'll always stay rational. And only way we can do this is by following our reason. The Consolations of Philosophy by Boethius reminded me a lot of my favorite film of all time. And I know it will sound incredibly cliched when I'll tell you that one of my favorite films is The Shawshank Redemption. What that film conveys is exactly the same of what Boethius tries to tell us. Because at some point, if you remember, Andy Dufresne tells us that we should either get busy living or we should get busy dying. And there is no second option in life. You either learn how to live, you either cultivate your powers within and get a grip and control of your life and your emotions, or you get busy dying, the same way as Boethius was in the beginning of this book, when he was singing the songs of the glorious past, the past that could never be returned. I would really recommend you to read this wonderful book. Boethius is a true philosopher. He's a philosopher doctor who can heal your soul, your mind, your spirit. So I would really recommend you to read this. But I would also like to recommend a more contemporary book written by Alain de Botton. It's called The Consolations of Philosophy. They have exactly the same title. So it's a wonderful book which explores ideas not only of Boethius but of Socrates, Epictetus, Epicurus and many other philosophers. I would like to thank you all for watching this video. If you're interested about digging deeper into those ideas, consider subscribing to my newsletter, where I can kind of explore and talk about those ideas a bit deeper than I can do in a 5 to 10 minute video. You can also support me by giving a like to this video. If you think this is all worth it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.